Welcome to HOA Karen Gets Denied. This is what selective enforcement looks like. You need to leave this property immediately, or I am calling the police for trespassing. That is what Evelyn Gray shouted at me when I walked up to the vacant lot on Maple Court with my phone and a printed copy of the HOA covenants. The lot had been sitting empty for 3 years, overgrown with weeds and scotch broom, and now there was a contractor truck parked on the grass with a guy unloading a chainsaw like the sale was already done. Nobody had told the homeowners. Nobody had posted the required notice. I am a project manager in Spokane, Washington. My hours are not flexible, and I moved to Stonegate Terrace HOA because I wanted a safer street close to my job and I thought rules would keep things calm. Instead, I got a community where management hides behind procedures, and the notice period is always too short. What was at stake for me was my ability to pay my mortgage without surprise fees, without risking my credit score. Because if the board could sell common property without transparency, they could levy assessments to cover the shortfall and stick every homeowner with the bill. The first evidence clue was an email I got 2 weeks earlier, a single line in the monthly newsletter that said the board was exploring disposal of underutilized assets. And when I checked the member portal that morning, the agenda for the special meeting had been updated sometime overnight to include a vote on the Maple Court parcel. Evelyn Gray is the rules enforcement chair who is always recording, and she had her phone aimed at my face before I even finished my question. She wore a lanyard with a key fob and tiny badge with color-coded tabs, the kind of accessory that signals someone who takes procedural authority very seriously. I asked her who the buyer was and why the appraisal had not been posted. She said, "It is not personal, it is policy, and the board has the right to dispose of assets in the best interest of the community." I said, "The covenant requires a membership vote for the sale of common property over $5,000. And this lot is easily worth $40,000. She said, "The decision is final, end of discussion, and you are disrupting a work site." The contractor looked uncomfortable and kept his distance. I took 3 photos of the truck, the stakes, and Evelyn holding her clipboard. She told me I was harassing her, and if I did not leave, she would file a complaint. I left, but I immediately sent an email to the board president asking for the appraisal, the list of competing bids, and the vote tally. The reply came back in under an hour from the management company, a form letter that said records requests must be submitted in writing with a processing fee and a 10 business day turnaround. I printed the covenant section on asset sales, highlighted the vote requirement, and drove to the management office. The woman at the desk said the manager was out and I should email my concerns. I said I already did. She said she could not discuss pending board matters. I asked if there was a pending board matter. She would not answer. I took a photo of the covenant page on the counter and left. That evening, I checked the portal again, and the agenda had changed. The line about the Maple Court parcel was gone. In its place was a note that said the special meeting had been postponed pending further review. I took a screenshot with the timestamp. Then I scrolled back through my camera roll and found the original agenda photo I had taken that morning. The wording was different. The parcel description had been edited. I did not know if anyone else had noticed, but I saved both images to 3 different places. That was my proof the vote did not happen correctly. Because if they were changing the record after the fact, the transparency was already compromised. 2 days later, I got a violation notice in the mail. It said I had failed to maintain my lawn edging to community standards, and I had 12 hours to cure the deficiency or face a $50 per day fine. My lawn edging was fine. I had photos from the weekend showing a clean cut. I walked the perimeter with my phone and took another set of photos, then checked my neighbors' yards. Half the street had worse edging than mine. I emailed the board with the comparison photos and asked if this was retaliation for asking questions about the lot sale. No reply. The next morning, I got a call from an attorney. He said he represented the HOA and I was making defamatory statements in emails to the board, and if I continued to accuse board members of misconduct, I would be personally liable. I said I asked factual questions about a property sale and got a retaliatory violation notice. He said the violation was issued in the normal course of enforcement and my allegations were baseless. I said I had photos of the agenda edits. He paused. Then he said the board would be happy to address my concerns at the next regular meeting if I submitted my questions in advance. I said the covenant does not require me to submit questions in advance. He said it is a courtesy. I said I would see them at the meeting. He hung up. I posted a summary of the situation on the community portal discussion board, keeping it factual and attaching the 2 agenda screenshots. Within an hour, 3 other homeowners replied saying they had also received surprise violation notices in the past week, all with 12-hour cure demands. One of them said her notice was for a trash can being visible from the street, even though pickup day was that morning. Another said his was for a discolored fence panel that had been the same color for 2 years. The thread started to grow. People were asking what was going on. Evelyn Gray replied with a single line, spreading misinformation about board actions is a violation of the community standards policy and may result in suspension of portal privileges. I screenshot that too. The portal turned into a pile-on. Someone else posted that they had heard the buyer for the Maple Court lot was the HOA treasurer's brother-in-law. Someone else said the appraisal was never done, and the board was using a tax assessment from 2019. I did not know if those claims were true, but the board shut down the entire discussion thread and posted a notice that all commentary on pending matters was prohibited until after the vote. That was when I knew they were trying to rush it through before anyone could organize. The regular meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7. I cleared my calendar. I printed every email, every screenshot, every photo, and put them in a binder with tabs. I also printed the relevant sections of the Washington State Homeowners Association Act and highlighted the transparency requirements. My plan was to ask for the appraisal, the competing bids, and the vote record during the public comment period, and if they refused, I would read the statute out loud so everyone in the room would know they were out of compliance. Wednesday afternoon, I got a text from a delivery driver I had talked to a few times when he dropped packages on my porch. He said he was at the Maple Court lot that morning and saw Evelyn Gray arguing with another homeowner who was taking photos. He said Evelyn grabbed the homeowner's phone and tried to delete the photos, and when the homeowner pulled away, Evelyn threatened to have her arrested for trespassing. He said he had dashcam footage if I needed it. I thanked him and asked if he would send me the clip. He did. It was 2 minutes of Evelyn yelling and reaching for the other homeowner's phone, clear as day. That was my ally, a witness who had no stake in the dispute and video evidence of Evelyn's behavior. Thursday evening, I arrived at the community center meeting room 15 minutes early. The board was already set up at a folding table in the front, nameplates arranged in a neat row. Evelyn Gray sat at the far right with her lanyard and clipboard. The treasurer was next to her. The president, a retired guy named Ron, sat in the middle shuffling papers. There were maybe 20 homeowners in the audience, more than usual. I sat in the third row with my binder on my lap. Evelyn looked at me and raised her phone. I raised mine and took a photo of her taking a photo of me. Ron cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. The agenda was printed on a half sheet and handed out at the door. Maple Court parcel sale was listed under new business. Ron went through the usual reports, budget update, landscaping contract renewal, variance requests. Nobody was paying attention. Everyone was waiting for the lot. Finally, Ron said, "We have a proposal to sell the vacant parcel on Maple Court to a private buyer for $22,000, and the board has reviewed the offer and determined it is in the best interest of the community to accept." I raised my hand. Ron said, "We will take questions after the vote." I stood up. I said, "The covenant requires a membership vote for the sale of common property, not a board vote." Ron said, "The board has the authority to dispose of underutilized assets under Section 12 of the management agreement." I said, "Section 12 does not override the covenant." Evelyn stood up and said, "It is not personal, it is policy, and this is not the time for grandstanding." I said, "I am asking a legal question." She said, "You are disrupting the meeting." I said, "I am a homeowner and I have the right to speak." Ron said, "We will note your objection and proceed with the vote." I said, "I have proof the agenda was altered after it was posted, and I have evidence the appraisal was never completed." The room went quiet. Evelyn said, "That is a baseless accusation." I pulled out the 2 agenda screenshots and held them up. I said, "This is the original agenda from Tuesday morning, and this is the version posted Tuesday afternoon." The parcel description changed. Someone in the audience said, "Let him talk." Another person said, "We have a right to see the appraisal." Ron looked at the treasurer. The treasurer whispered something. Ron said, "The appraisal is not required for board-approved sales under $25,000. I said the covenant does not have a $25,000 threshold. It says any common property." Evelyn said, "The decision is final. End of discussion." I said, "You cannot finalize a vote that has not happened yet." That was when another homeowner stood up, the woman from the dashcam video. She said Evelyn tried to physically take her phone when she was photographing the lot, and she had reported it to the police. Evelyn's face went red. She said, "I did no such thing, and you were trespassing on a work site." The woman said, "It is common property, and I am a homeowner. I have the right to be there." Someone else said, "Who is the buyer?" Ron said, "The buyer's identity is confidential until closing." I said the treasurer's brother-in-law is the buyer according to the portal discussion before you shut it down. The treasurer stood up and said, "That is defamatory, and I will not tolerate it." I said, "Then provide the competing bids and prove the sale was competitive." Ron banged the gavel and said, "This meeting is out of order." I said, "No, this sale is out of order." Ron adjourned the meeting without a vote. People were shouting questions. Evelyn grabbed her clipboard and left through the side door. I followed her into the hallway. I said, "You know this sale is improper, and you are covering for the treasurer." She said, "It is not personal, it is policy, and if you continue to harass me, I will get a restraining order." I said, "I am not harassing you, I am asking for transparency." She said, "You have no idea what you are talking about, and the board is acting in full compliance with state law." I said, "Then show me the appraisal." She said, "There is no appraisal because the tax assessment is sufficient." I said, "The tax assessment is from 2019 and it does not reflect current market value." She walked away. I went home and typed up a formal records request, appraisal, competing bids, vote tally, buyer identity, and the full email thread between the board and the management company regarding the sale. I sent it certified mail to the management office and CC'd the board. I also forwarded the email headers to management showing the timeline of the agenda edits, with a note that altering posted meeting materials after homeowners have accessed them is a violation of the Open Meetings Act. That was my evidence reveal, the moment I showed I had documentation they could not deny. Friday morning, I got an email from the HOA attorney. It said I was making unfounded accusations that constituted defamation per se against board members, and I needed to retract my statements and issue a public apology or face legal action. The email had a 1-hour deadline. I called the attorney back. I said, "Everything I stated is documented and I will not retract factual questions." He said, "Your allegations imply corruption and self-dealing without evidence." I said, "I have the agenda edits, the dashcam video, and the emails. I also have the portal edit history from my camera timeline showing when the discussion thread was deleted." He went quiet. Then he said, "The board is willing to table the sale pending an independent appraisal if you agree to stop posting on the portal." I said no. The board needs to disclose the buyer, provide the competing bids, and hold a membership vote. He said, "That is not going to happen." I said, "Then I will forward the receipts to the entire board so nobody can deny it." He hung up. I forwarded every screenshot, every email, the dashcam video, and the portal edit history to all 5 board members, with a subject line that said records request follow-up and transparency concerns. I included a summary timeline and highlighted the covenant sections they were violating. I did not name the treasurer's brother-in-law because I did not have independent confirmation, but I noted that the refusal to disclose the buyer or competing bids created the appearance of impropriety. Then I posted a public notice on the portal that I had submitted a formal records request and expected a response within 10 business days per state law. Evelyn replied within minutes, "Your continued harassment of the board is unacceptable, and you are hereby suspended from portal privileges pending a hearing." I screenshot her reply and forwarded it to the state HOA ombudsman with a complaint form. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. The notice said I was accused of violating the community standards policy by making defamatory statements and disrupting HOA operations, and the board would determine appropriate sanctions up to and including suspension of voting rights and levy of fines. I printed the notice and added it to my binder. I also contacted the woman from the dashcam video and asked if she would attend as a witness. She said yes. The delivery driver said he would come if needed. I had 2 allies and a stack of evidence. The board had a rigged vote and a missing appraisal. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. Wednesday at 7, I walked into the community center meeting room and found the board seated at the same table, same nameplates. Evelyn Gray had her phone and clipboard. Ron had a printed copy of my emails. The treasurer looked nervous. There were about 15 homeowners in the audience, including my 2 witnesses. Ron called the hearing to order and read the charges. He said I had made false and defamatory statements about the board, disrupted official meetings, and violated the community standards policy. He said the board was considering a $500 fine and a 1-year suspension of portal and voting privileges. I said, I am entitled to present evidence and witnesses. Ron said, this is an administrative hearing, not a trial. I said, state law requires due process for fines and sanctions. He looked at the attorney, who was sitting in the front row. The attorney nodded. Ron said, you have 10 minutes. I opened my binder and walked through the timeline. I showed the original agenda screenshot with the Maple Court parcel language. Then the edited version posted hours later. I showed the email from the management company confirming no appraisal had been ordered. I showed the covenant section requiring a membership vote for asset sales. I showed the violation notice I received 12 hours after I asked questions, and the comparison photos proving my lawn edging was compliant. I showed the dashcam video of Evelyn trying to grab the other homeowner's phone. I showed the attorney's email threatening me with defamation claims and the 1-hour deadline. I showed Evelyn's portal reply suspending my access. Then I showed the portal edit history proving the discussion thread had been deleted after homeowners started asking questions. I said, this is not defamation. This is documentation. The board tried to sell common property without transparency, retaliated against homeowners who asked questions, and altered official records to cover it up. Evelyn stood up. She said, everything the board did was within our authority and in compliance with policy. I said, which policy? She said, the asset management policy adopted by the board in 2022. I said, that policy does not override the covenant. She said, the decision is final, end of discussion. I said, you have said that 3 times now and it is still not true. Someone in the audience laughed. Ron banged the gavel and said personal attacks are not allowed. I said, quoting someone is not a personal attack. The woman from the dashcam video stood up and said, I have a question. Ron said, this is not public comment time. She said, I am a witness and I have the right to speak. She described Evelyn lunging for her phone and threatening her with arrest. She said she filed a police report and the officer told her Evelyn had no authority to restrict access to common property. Evelyn said, that is not what happened. The woman said, I have video. She held up her phone. The room erupted. Ron adjourned the hearing and said the board would issue a written decision within 10 days. I said, I expect the records request response first. The attorney stood up and said, Mr. Gray, the board is prepared to withdraw the hearing charges and rescind the violation notice if you agree to cease public commentary on the Maple Court matter until the appraisal is complete. I said, my name is not Gray, and I will not agree to a gag order. He said, it is not a gag order, it is a mutual agreement to de-escalate. I said, the board can de-escalate by following the covenant. Evelyn said, you are impossible to work with. I said, I am not working with you, I am holding you accountable. The next morning, the management company posted a notice on the portal. The Maple Court parcel sale has been postponed pending an independent appraisal and a legal review of the transaction process. All homeowners will receive notice of a special meeting to vote on the sale once the review is complete. I took a screenshot. That afternoon, I got a call from the attorney. He said Evelyn Gray had been advised to cease all contact with me, and the board was issuing a public clarification that the violation notice was issued in error. He said the hearing charges were dropped. He said the buyer had withdrawn the offer. I asked who the buyer was. He said he could not disclose that. I said, "It was the treasurer's brother-in-law, was it not?" He said, "I cannot comment on that, but the treasurer has recused himself from all votes related to property transactions going forward." I said that is not an answer. He said, "It is the only answer you are getting, and frankly, you won." I hung up. 2 weeks later, the appraisal came back at $41,000. The board posted it on the portal with a note that no sale would proceed without a membership vote. Evelyn Gray resigned from the rules enforcement chair position and stopped attending meetings. The portal discussion threads were reopened with a new moderation policy that prohibited deletion of factual questions. The delivery driver sent me a message saying he was glad I stood up to them. The woman from the dashcam video said she was running for the board in the next election. I kept my binder in case I needed it again. The stakes were my ability to pay my mortgage without surprise fees, without risking my credit score, and I protected that by refusing to let the board hide behind procedures. The lesson was simple. When an HOA tries to move the goalposts on what counts as compliance while claiming it is routine, you document everything. You follow the covenant to the letter, and you do not back down when they threaten you with lawyers and fines. Transparency is not optional. It is the law. And if you have proof the vote did not happen correctly, eventually the truth comes out. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.